Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon, this lunchtime. If you haven't yet heard, we're all sharing where we're from in the chat so that we can see the diversity of folks from around the state. It looks like we do have quite the array of attendees, and I'm excited to talk with you and hear from you about local climate action and maybe some of the efforts that you've been working on in Maine. For those of you who I do not yet know, my name is Josh, and I'm the Climate and Clean Energy Outreach Coordinator with the Natural Resources Council of Maine. NRCM is a nonprofit organization that has been protecting the nature of Maine since 1959 by harnessing the power of science, the law, and the voices of people who value Maine's environment. Kristen, we can begin sharing some of the slides here so that you can all be on the same page with us.
I'm sorry, my browser is frozen.
That's okay,
give
no
me
worries.
a second. Or Josh, if you don't mind pulling up for now.
Yeah, there will inevitably be Zoom issues with meetings like this. Well, I can go ahead and we can just look at each other while I give kind of the intro and context setting, and then we'll get caught up in a second here with some of the slides that we have to share with all of you. So our intention today is to illustrate some of the opportunities available for cities and towns in Maine to take action on climate change in their own communities. Climate action on the federal level has been slow, has been a little bit discouraging of late, but there are an unprecedented number of local climate projects and funding resources that are now dedicated to local climate solutions that we're excited to share with all of you. Can we all now see the slides? I'm seeing them. Wonderful. So I'm really excited about the panel that we have today. We have quite the range of presenters. First, you're going to be hearing from NRCM's Outreach Director, Emmy Burge, about why local climate action matters and the work that NRCM has been doing to facilitate that local action. Then you'll hear a bit more from me as I share about the current opportunities available and some examples of successful climate projects around the state. After that, we'll hear from Scott Vaughn, the Executive Director of the Center for an Ecology-Based Economy, about his experiences as a service provider for the Community Resilience Partnership and some of the local work he's done in Norway and the surrounding area. And then finally, we'll pass the baton to Kathleen Sullivan, who's the founder of Freeport Can and an incredible activist in Freeport that has done some phenomenal local organizing work to incentivize climate action in her community. Feel free to enter comments or questions in the chat throughout. We'll be collecting those to answer and know that we'll have 15 or 20 minutes at the end to have a more intentional interactive question and answer session. So we'll be sure to get to your questions at that time. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Emmy to get us started.
All right, thanks, Josh, and hey, everybody. I'm Emmy Burge, NRCM's Outreach Director. And prior to my role as Outreach Director, I've been at NRCM for more than a decade, working on climate action at the local, state, and federal levels, first as our Climate and Clean Energy Policy Advocate, and then as our Federal Director for 5 years. And federal climate action happens at a slower pace. It's one that's harder to predict and to participate in, but it's still important to stay connected and engaged because when federal changes happen, they can be monumental. A great thing about living in a place like Maine is that an individual person's actions can make a real difference both at the state and at the local level. And it's very rewarding to see your time and energy pay off with real results. A few years ago, I worked closely with people in South Portland who, through collective action at the local level, stopped a risky and polluting tar sands oil export terminal from being built in their city. They did this at the local level by developing a municipal ordinance called the Clear Skies Ordinance, which bans the loading of oil onto tankers and in parts of the city's harbor. And this is an example of a community making their own decisions to protect their air, their water, and the health of their citizens. We've seen a lot of inspirational environmental activism at the local level in Maine, including the passage of plastic bag and styrofoam bans, first at the community level, and then have that activism bubble up to become statewide bans. Also, organizing at the local level can be a lot of fun. You get the chance to team up with your friends and your neighbors to make a difference in your own community. It's a place that's easier to make your voice heard and to have an impact with your local decision makers. And there are a lot of important decisions that can be and are made at the local level. Cities and towns have important roles to play in where clean energy generation sites are located, how land within municipal boundaries are used and managed, and local transportation decisions, and which public services will be prioritized. Given the urgency of responding to climate change, municipalities must be proactive in advocating for local climate solutions, accessing funding from state and federal sources, which we'll talk more about, and implementing effective climate and clean energy projects. And they need people like you to get involved and advocate for these local solutions. So thank you all so much for joining this and for all of the work that you're doing in your communities. And I'll pass it back to you, Josh.
Thank you so much, Emmy. So as Emmy mentioned, the relationship between federal, state, and local is incredibly important. And I want to quickly go over that relationship and why it is that we're in a situation now where we have an unprecedented level of funding that is available for local climate action, despite maybe federal climate action not happening as quickly as we'd like to see it. So in terms of climate action, the federal government has the ability, theoretically, to produce large sums of money for climate projects. We influence those large spending packages and laws through our congressional delegation. In Maine, we have 2 senators and 2 representatives. The state is then responsible for advocating for funding from the federal government and then distributing that incoming funding in a way that makes sense for a given state. And here in Maine, we have a really fantastic climate action plan that was created in 2019 that guides a lot of our climate action and allows us to allocate some of that incoming funding more easily to our climate goals. The state has recently, within the last year, released and unveiled several programs that support local projects that we'll be touching on in a second here. That leads us to local governance. So comprised of town government and local groups that advocate for each of their needs, there are over 500 municipalities in Maine. Each have a unique composition in terms of their local governance, in terms of their positionality, in terms of who lives there. But in each respect, local action is really exciting because, as Emmy mentioned, each voice is all the more impactful when you're communicating with town governments that has a smaller constituency than some of the federal level things. I want to jump over to look into some of the programs that are currently available for municipalities to receive funding and do climate-related work. So if we can jump over to that slide, there we are. First, I want to mention that while we are somewhat frustrated with the fact that the federal government has not been able to pass the Build Back Better Act, there were several large spending packages recently within the past 3 years that have led to local climate funding opportunities, namely the American Rescue Plan and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law was passed earlier this year, and so we still don't have a lot of the funding ready for use, but the American Rescue Plan has been turned into the Maine Recovery and Jobs Plan, and we now have a distribution allocation that includes several competitive grants through that program. The first of those competitive grants that we are really excited about is the Community Resilience Partnership. This was $4.5 million for community resilience projects. All of them are available through competitive grants. We'll be touching on this more in a second, but the first round was really successful. 75 communities were awarded with grants to conduct local climate projects. And the second round is now open. And I want to be sure that all of you on this call are aware of that second round of funding so that you can hopefully choose to pursue it with your town government. Another thing that I wanted to share that was exciting, infrastructure and recovery grants, also through the American Rescue Plan, through the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan. 13 communities in Maine will receive $20 million in funding for bolstering infrastructure against flooding and other climate impacts. We also now have electric school bus funding available, which is really exciting to me, both because the 250 priority communities that are selected to be eligible for electric school bus applications will be contributing to mitigating climate change by not burning as much diesel fuel. But not only will this significantly reduce carbon emissions, it will also greatly increase the health of our school children because diesel pollution is linked to asthma and other health complications, can be 10 times higher inside a school bus than outside of a school bus. So this is a great example of a project that tackles public health and climate change at the same time. The workforce transportation pilot was also unveiled within the last month. $5 million is available through the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan through the Maine Department of Transportation to support local, regional, and state workforce transportation pilot projects. As many of you probably know, we underfinance our public transportation infrastructure here in Maine. So this is a great opportunity for municipalities and regions to advocate for needs to allow their workforce to get into work, especially in rural areas. That's a series of competitive grants as well. There's also now $25 million that has been made available for municipal and school energy efficiency work, and also for low-income weatherization that can be advocated for by municipalities. And MDOT, the Maine Department of Transportation, and Efficiency Maine just submitted a plan for expanding our electric vehicle charging network that includes installation in dozens of towns throughout the state. So there are a lot of things that are happening, a lot of local projects that are contributing to reducing our total emissions in Maine and moving towards a clean energy future. If we can jump to the next slide, I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the Community Resilience Partnership. As I mentioned before, it's been a very successful program, and this slide really highlights the geography of that success. You can see here on the screen, these pins represent communities that were awarded grants. 75 of them were awarded. All of the yellow pins are those that were awarded through a service provider, and Scott will tell us a little bit more about that in a moment. And all the green ones were those that applied via their municipal government to receive funding for community projects. A really wide array of projects were funded. There are 75 recommended avenues that the state has put out for municipalities to do as projects, but you can also come up with, as a municipality, an independent project that might fall within the criteria. I wanted to note just a couple of those projects, ranging from stormwater management in Vinyl Haven to electric vehicle charging installation in Carabasset Valley to climate action planning in Norway. So many things meet the criteria for what a community resilience grant could go towards. As I mentioned, the second round of applications for community action grants is now open, and I would encourage all of you to attend an informational webinar coming up on August 3rd. We'll share more information and the link to sign up to that webinar soon, if you think that your town has a project that could take advantage of this funding. So to hear more about this particular program and the work that the Center for an Ecology-Based Economy has done, I'm going to hand it over to Scott Vaughn.
All right, thanks, Josh. That was a good intro there to the program. So yeah, so CB, we've been here for 10 years, and our tagline has always been resilient communities restoring the earth. And I don't think when we started this in Norway, Maine, we ever could have imagined that we'd be under contract with the state to work with our local communities and actually have resources to do some real projects on the ground. So when we heard about this program, we threw our hat in the ring early on as a service provider, and GOPIF was just looking. That's the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, which is managing this program. We threw our hat in the ring before they even started giving out service provider grants to just do that pro bono for local towns that wanted to get up and running. And Norway, we ended up working with Norway. So Norway actually has already gotten a grant in the program. And then we also wrote a service provider grant. We had 5 communities around here willing to be part of that next round. And so we got that grant, and the service provider grant for us. So these towns are listed as part of this program, but they're actually, our job is to enroll the towns and get them into the program and then help them write their first grant. And in most cases, we'll be actually writing the grant, which is what we did for Norway. And in Norway's case, we wrote the grant for the town without being under contract for the state, but the town wanted us to actually facilitate some of the programs that we wrote the grant for. So in Norway, we're doing 3 projects that are all on that list that Josh mentioned. And there's this list of it's over 70 projects and the other projects, and these are no match grants of up to $50,000, and they can apply once the town's enrolled, they can apply every 6 months for another grant. And it can be for multiple actions that are on that approved list. If they're not on the approved list, there's a small match of 10 to 20%, depending on the town, to come up with. And we're talking with one town now about something maybe a little outside the box. But in Norway, they chose to build a standing climate committee and have that be part of the town going forward. And then to do 2 assessments, kind of some planning work the town thought, because Norway's already done a number of the actions on the list, but they wanted to step back and do some planning. So there's 2 different planning grants in there. One is for assessing the climate impacts on vulnerable populations in the community and doing some planning around that. And then also a critical infrastructure assessment. So that's what Norway is doing. And then that will hopefully identify projects going forward that they can continue applying for every 6 months. So you can apply every 6 months. You have 12 months to complete any of those. So a town could have 2 grants going at the same time. So once we got Norway up and running, we applied for the service provider grant with 5 towns in the area. And our 5 towns soon became 4. And this is just a note of caution. If your town is going to apply for a grant directly, a community action grant, be sure you don't also sign up with a service provider, because the service provider, we had that happen in our community. One of our 5 communities went ahead and applied for the grant on their own, but they also had sent us a letter of intent to be part of our service provider grant. But since they were already enrolled, we had no job to do for that town. So GoPIF was really understanding and let us kind of reconfigure some of the funding that we had, so we didn't lose that entire amount for our grant. So now we're working with 4 towns. So what we do with each town is there's 3 parts to getting the town enrolled in the program. We have to do a community self-evaluation, and that's a form that GoPIF provides for this program. And we basically work with people, town managers, select boards, other people in the town to kind of go through and see what the town has already done in terms of climate resiliency. In most cases, that's not a lot, and these self-evaluations will be done every 2 years by the towns that are enrolled, so that I think they're, in this case, it's like setting a baseline for where municipalities are in the state, and then seeing how the effectiveness of the program moving forward. So the 3 things that we've got to do are the evaluation. We've got to that each town has to pass a municipal resolution that has some required statements, and then there's a whole kind of a la carte menu of other whereases you can put in there. Could be a sticking point in some towns to actually get their select board or whoever their government to pass one of these resolutions. So we try to get that in the conversation really early. When we do our community engagement, we're also required to do a community meeting with each community, at least one meeting. We're doing 2 with each community to discuss all these options and come up with priorities. But we also bring that resolution to the community and ask for community input on what we want to add to the resolution. So it's the resolution, the self-assessment, and then we go through and prioritize, work with that list of 70 or so actions, and then come up with a list of priorities that the townspeople want. And then it's up to the select board or whoever is administering, going to be submitting the grant to come up with the final grant. And again, CB will help write that. So far we've had 3 community engagement meetings, and we've had varying success. We've done the same exact outreach situation in each, and in one community we had only 5 people from town show up. It was a great conversation. In another community we had 35 people show up, and it was got a little, we weren't quite prepared for so many people and so many varying opinions about how we should be doing this. And so that meeting was pretty exciting. That was on Monday. And then last night we had another meeting in Woodstock, and we had about 15 people, very efficient, and we got a lot of work done. In all cases, we've started to identify where the priorities are in each town, and what people are thinking about, and how they think about climate resiliency in their town. We have one town that sent us a letter of intent as part of our service provider grant, and is having trouble. The town manager sent us that, the letter, and they're having trouble with their select board getting them and excited about this. So we're thinking we're going to perhaps need to do an end run around from the town manager to the select board and go directly to the select board with a group of citizens in the town, which, we know a lot of people in the town that want to be part of this. And so far their select board isn't stepping up. In terms of the projects that communities have looked forward, are looking at so far, again, this is not like people don't vote on like, these are going to be the projects, but we're just kind of gauging community interest. And about 4 or 5 things have come up pretty much across the board. EV charging always comes up. Doing planning work, creating a standing committee. Heat pumps have come up a lot. That's kind of a low-hanging fruit for some communities. It's like, hey, you can get funding here to put heat pumps in your municipal buildings. So it's kind of an easy sell. And then watershed protection, where we are, we're in a lake region. So watershed protection, there's a lot of natural solutions in these 72 actions, or 70 actions. So watershed protections has come up in our communities because most of them are on rivers or lakes. So that's kind of where we are. And yeah, happy to answer questions later. So I'll hand it back over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Scott, for providing some insights into the process for getting funding there. For the Community Resilience Partnership. So we have one more presenter. We've heard so far a lot about programs made available for communities and available funding sources to pursue. But I want to finish out the presentation portion by sending it over to Kathleen Sullivan, who has done tremendous work to create action committees in her hometown, independent of any funding sources. It's been a really phenomenal organizing effort, and I'd love to hear a little bit more, Kathleen, about the work that you've done and how you've done it.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you for inviting Freeport Can and me as their speaker to tell you about this really exciting project that a year ago wasn't even in anybody's imagination. So we're a very, very, very new organization. It was actually born last January on a very cold winter night. We had a big Zoom meeting because we couldn't have, because of COVID, we couldn't get the community together for this meeting that we had planned for about 4 or 5 months before this big meeting. We had about 200 people who came to the Zoom meeting that we had for the community to tell them both what's happening with the science, what's happening on the ground in Freeport, and to tell them about some of the actions that we were considering and had heard about from people in town that they would like to be part of. What I really want to tell people about, and I hope you can come away with this sense, is how much how hungry people are in the town, and for a sense of feeling that they can come together with other people and don't have to be alone with their fears about what's going on, and that there is something that actually they can do. And 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I would not have believed the amount of response that we would have gotten to our proposal to come and talk to us about what you're concerned about. I would have thought that a few people would come, people weren't yet convinced about climate change. What our experience is very different. And that is that people are very worried, but not yet, but not clear on what they can do about it, and feeling very alone with it. So that when they hear about us, their eyes light up, their chin goes up, they come towards us. They say, tell me about what you're doing. They say, I am really worried. And I'll tell you how we did all that. But I want to say that after that meeting that we had with about 200 people who came to that first Zoom meeting, we had 7 or 8 action committees that people signed up for. So what I want you to think about is not the fact that I'm here in the room with you, but that behind me, all around me, are people from the town of Freeport. new people that I've just met, that we've all just met, people who've stepped forward to work with us so that there's a sense of connection, there's a sense of excitement, there's a sense of enthusiasm, there's a sense of hope that comes from this feeling of everybody coming together. People who never met each other before coming together to talk about their concerns and their worries and to see what they can do about it. So I want to talk about interconnection. You know, that's what all the scientists will tell us, what we have to understand in order to be able to really work with the problem of climate is how all the ecosystems are interconnected and how everything we do is interconnected. And in a sense, that's what all the action committees we have are teaching people, even like the consumer committee we have. You have to learn kind of what does this dress do to the world by how it's produced and how it's shipped and how it's, you know, washed. And but let me just tell you, I'm just going off. So we do have 7 action committees right now, and those action committees are, we have a municipal government committee, we have a transportation committee, we have a social justice committee, we have a solar and buildings committee, we have a lands and waters committee, a food committee, and a consumer choices committee, all actively meeting once every 2 weeks, all with members on it. Members are coming and going, but members, people who bring their ideas and their expertise, because there's a tremendous amount of expertise in our community, as I'm sure there is in yours. You know, there's people with knowledge that they're eager to be able to offer you. But let me tell you how it started. It started, and how I got this going. And I'm only going to use I for a little bit, and then we're going to really go back to we. So, and I think what it takes to get something like this started, if any of you were thinking about that, starting this on your own, is a little bit of chutzpah, a little bit of willing to break the rules and talk to people about what they don't want to talk about, because not everybody wants to talk about how scared they are and how worried they are. It takes a little bit of chutzpah to do this. It takes a sense of adventure and a little bit of sense of play, because you don't know what you'll put together. You don't know what blocks are going to be handed to you. So you're going to play with the new blocks that come to you. So with that kind of attitude to starting something, and I had that attitude when I thought about starting something, because it was Freeport and my daughter and I, who originally put the first band of styrofoam in Freeport. We banned styrofoam in Freeport, and 3 years later, the Montreal banned all styrofoam CFCs. You know, it is amazing what local action can do. So I already had that experience, but I had done nothing since then. Anyway, what I did. So here's the story. It's September. The sun turned scarlet. It turned so scarlet, it scared the living bejesus out of me. And I felt it's from the fires out west. And I felt so alone with the sun turning scarlet and not many people talking about the fires and what was happening. And I began to get really scared. And I've been a therapist for 50 years in my life, and I know what you're supposed to do when you're feeling scared and when you're feeling helpless. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to talk about it to other people. You're supposed to get connected, and you're supposed to have an action plan. So I said to myself, Sweet Pea, you better get going. And I started talking. Some of the people I started talking to are on the call with us right now. I can see Suzanne's face is here, Mason is here, Laura Hench is here. We started talking about, they came and sat on my porch, and we talked about what it is we could do and whether other people were scared. And we started having small group meetings. And in those small group meetings, people came together from the town and started sharing their concerns and their worries. We had 5 or 6 of those meetings on people's porches at Wolf Neck Farm. And in those meetings, people started talking about what they wanted to do, which is they wanted to make Freeport be a community, a kind of model community for living in harmony with the needs of the climate and of the planet. Wow. So everybody had ideas. I didn't have these ideas. I didn't form the ideas about what we should do. They arose. And there's a word in community organizing these days called emergent. It emerged. it just, and it continues to emerge day by day. People offer themselves and their skills to us. And so we continued to have these small group meetings until finally we had enough people together and enough ideas for action committees to have that January meeting. Since then, we've had those meetings. We have a number of action plans that have already been put into place. We started a farmer's market for local food. We're going to have Laura, who's right there, is going to do an Electrify Freeport Festival in September to teach us all about what we can electrify in town. We're thinking about a community solar project and learning about that. We're learning about how to work and get some of the grants that Scott was just talking about. We're working with the municipal government in town. And every day it's just exciting to see more people come and meet us and get connected to us and feel connected themselves by being able to do something and by being able to talk about something that they are concerned about. And it doesn't have to be on the scale that we're doing it. That's the other thing I want to say. I'm right now in Jonesport. I'm visiting and staying in this place. I can see I'm in Addison. I can see the Jonesport Bridge right out the window. You could do it in a group of 10 people in a town like Jonesport or Addison. You don't have to do it on a big scale. You could do the same model on a much smaller scale. So I think that's all I want to breathlessly say to you right now. But you know that I can only say how energizing it is and rewarding and how grateful I am to have been able to do this work with the people that I've been able to do it with, the people I've met, the kindness and compassion and generosity they've offered. And I have enormous gratitude that has arisen from doing this work. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kathleen. That's a very inspiring thing. And I wanted to mention Kathleen has been kind enough to offer to share her contact information and is actually looking forward to doing some trainings on this model with other municipalities and other town committees that might be excited and looking into more of what Freeport Can is working on. But really inspiring stuff. We're going to get to questions and answers in a little bit here. I know that we've covered a lot, and I want you all to know that we will be following up by email with links to many of the programs that we've discussed today. You can stay up to date on climate opportunities through Maine's Climate Action Plan site. Kristen, if you wouldn't mind dropping that into the chat. The Climate Action Plan is a really inspiring document, and the state keeps up to date with local opportunities and state level opportunities to get involved in advancing Maine's Climate Action Plan, and that's a great resource to start with. We have also just developed a municipal action toolkit that we're excited about. If we could also get that into the chat, and again, we'll follow up with it. That has all the opportunities we've listed and more about how you as a community can pursue clean energy opportunities, about how you can pursue some of these grants that are available, or perhaps delve into committee work, as Kathleen has discussed. I also wanted to note that we've been really inspired by A Climate to Thrive. They've launched a program that several of you have been on, including Scott and Kathleen, called Local Leads the Way. Local Leads the Way is a series of Zoom meetings that bring activists from around the state together to talk about discrete opportunities to act locally on climate. And I think it's been a really successful model, especially during somewhat of a strange time like this. We're going to continue to be active on local issues as we progress towards our climate goals. And in fact, we simply can't meet the goals that we've laid out in our climate action plan without municipal action. It's really exciting work. Municipalities are very different, and that can be frustrating for large scale organizing. But as we've hopefully reinforced throughout, your voice matters all the more in a local space as you're a resident and as your representatives are representing a lot fewer people than, say, federal representatives. We will be updating our toolkit with the most recent opportunities for you to get engaged and conduct important climate projects within your own communities. So be sure to keep your eyes peeled for that. But now we have 4 presenters that are willing to answer some questions from you. We'd also love to hear from you about your experiences working in local climate action. So I'd love to open it up for questions. Kristen, did we have some questions in the chat that we want to start with?
Yeah, we had a question from Suzanne, who was asking Kathleen, how are you organized and who leads the work of Freeport Can?
We're what you call a flat organization. There are work group leaders. Each of these work groups is represented on what's on a steering committee. And I'm the coordinator of the steering committee. So there are about 10 people on the steering committee. We meet every 2 weeks on the steering committee and we make decisions by consensus. So that's how we're organized. We're a 501c3. We haven't raised a penny. We haven't gotten to that part yet. We're so new, really.
I think that's what's incredibly inspiring though, Kathleen, is you've accomplished a lot in a year without any funding, and you've put together a food network, and you've put together plans for doing electric vehicle demonstrations. It's a lot of work purely through volunteer willpower, which is very inspiring.
I think those were the questions I saw in the chat. So if folks have questions, you can either put it in the chat or feel free to raise your hand and we can call on you to ask.
Looks like Pat may have a question. Pat Maloney.
Yes, thank you. I know that somebody mentioned the work that's been going on in South Portland during the past few years, and it's been very impressive, and they have brought together their community as well. Kathleen, and I'm just wondering if you had met when you were initially getting started with other communities that were definitely into the work of community involvement and climate change.
I wasn't aware of them at the time. And we met with Yarmouth in the beginning. Certainly, you're right. We do need to partner more with other groups. And we've been working with ACTT. I would certainly love to meet more with Scott and get to know more what they've been doing. So we didn't do enough of that in the beginning. But anyway. I do, well, never mind.
Luke, I think you're up.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, I guess I had a question, in Farmington, it's a university town, but it's also very rural here and inland, and it's very different than the coast. And so it feels like the committee and who is on that committee, the membership needs to be diverse and also balanced. And it can't just be like university professors and professionals that sort of come in here. And I can just imagine a town meeting where you have a very sort of subgroup of people sort of maybe perceived as driving an agenda. And so I'm really sort of excited about what I've been hearing today. And I'm just trying to think about first steps for a community like Farmington, where I would really hope that we could come up with a committee that's diverse, right? That's maybe some representatives across the county and even the town. And so I don't know if any folks that have been working in this realm, how important maybe that committee composition is, and any recommendations you might have.
I know that Kathleen, you've been fielding a lot of questions, but Scott, you and I had a discussion before this about some of the work that you had to do and are continuing to do as a service provider with communities that are rural, that have diverse perspectives on climate, that potentially don't want some of these projects to be implemented in their town. And so I wonder if you could speak to that element a little bit more.
Sure, Luke, you're absolutely right. It's very different out here on this side of the highway from the coastal communities. And you can see a lot of the actions taking place out there. I don't know if Farmington's signing up for the Community Resilience Partnership, if they're already enrolled or not. I haven't really been following what Farmington's doing, but if you're not, I mean, I think there's a great opportunity. The thing that I'm probably more excited about in this Community Resilience Partnership than the actual money that the towns get is this sort of carrot to have these conversations in the town. I live in Otisfield. We had 35 people come out on Monday night to talk about climate resiliency in the town. There were definitely a few people in the crowd that came out to talk about, how this isn't real and it's not human caused and it's a waste of money and electric cars are going to destroy, just they had all the memes going. But having those people in the context of 34 of their neighbors that are deeply concerned about climate change, kind of set the tone for something, and it allowed these conversations. And I think we did a pretty good job of facilitating that, and the select board did as well, to make sure it didn't kind of just blow up into something that wasn't productive. But and doing that outreach, if you can find champions within the town government and within other town organizations to, we had a couple people in Otisfield that really went out and called all their friends and said, you need to come to this meeting. We had we did everything the same in Bethel. We had very poor turnout. Now we're getting a lot of buzz that a lot more people will turn up for the second meeting. It's one of the reasons why we're doing 2 meetings. In Bethel, people said, oh, we're going to come and we're going to bring 5 friends. But I think it's an opportunity to get and reach out to people that are the loggers, that, other folks in the town, that, the town government. I mean, we've had select board members that have come in, kind of skeptical. And then, like last night we had one that kind of came in a little skeptical and seemed like he really got into the spirit of it. And, by the end of the night, he was pretty excited about the program and what it could do for the town. So I think that would be a good avenue just to engage a more broad perspective, because we have, that when we went into Otisfield, that was a lot of that pushback. It was like, you guys are coming in here to tell us what to do. We don't want experts to come into our town and tell us what to do. And we were like, so last night we led with, we're not here to tell you what to do. We're here to just facilitate a conversation among all of you and share this great opportunity for your town. And I think that's the tone we want to set.
I would just add quickly, Scott, and then I think Kathleen wanted to jump in as well there, that the Community Resilience Partnership is a great opportunity for that reason, and also because there are so many things that qualify for what resilience might be in your community. So there are some things that might be more explicitly climate oriented that could produce some contestation around clean energy, but there are also, wastewater treatment facility upgrades that are the types of projects that most people living in a given area would want to support, regardless of whether or not it's a climate orientation. So I think some of it is approaching it from the perspective of, let's have this conversation and let's talk about the benefits that are available to our community through a very substantive grant opportunity. I think that's a great way to start some of those conversations. But Kathleen, you've also had some experience in this realm, so I want to toss it over to you.
Well, it's true. Reports one of us on this call right now, Mason calls it a long driveway community. There's a lot of us with long driveways, and we don't have a lot of diversity here. But we do have enough. What is surprising is that, and we have a social justice committee that is navigating how we can make connections to people in the different socioeconomic groups than we are, or might not quite agree with us. What's surprising is they haven't shown up in any form to object to times we've gone to the town council, or there's very little opposition here, and I was really surprised at that. But I'm in Addison right now, and if I were in Addison, what I would do is work on the fact that if you solarize or if you insulate your home, you're going to save a lot of money, and there's fishermen up here. What about the lobster industry? What if they don't pay attention? What's going to happen to the lobsters? I'm from Long Island, New York. The lobsters all went to Maine. Well, these lobsters are pretty soon going to go to Canada. There are people. And so the book Saving Us by Catherine Hayhoe, I don't know if any of you know that. It's a wonderful book. She's a Christian environmentalist. And she talks about how to talk to people who are not of the same political bent as you about what they care about and what worries them. And I think reading that book is a really good way to think about how to have these conversations that Scott was just saying that he was talking about, conversations that don't polarize, but rather bring together.
Thank you for that, Kathleen. It looks like we have another question in the chat from Kelsey. Kelsey asks, Scott, I'm curious, what were some things that were said to diffuse that link or that situation with deniers, and any helpful language that you found to diffuse?
Well, to Kathleen's point, the one person I'm thinking of that was in Otisfield didn't really try to derail the entire meeting, but was just having these side conversations and kind of pulled me aside during the break and was asking me these questions that when I answer, she would just roll her eyes and throw, it's like, but it's interesting. I mean, there's nothing, there's certainly no silver bullet there, but I think to just, again, to the point of most of the actions that the communities are looking to take, like whether humans cause it or not, that was like her first thing. Well, why are we talking about, getting off of fossil fuels when that's not the cause of it? I'm like, well, let's just talk about the actions then. Maybe you want to talk about the actions that can just save the town money, because it's clearly happening. I mean, we've got, we know that our ice out dates are earlier. We know that we're getting less snow. We know we're getting winter rains. We know it's harder on our highway crews. Like, so what can we do? Let's just not, we're not here to debate that whether this is happening or whether humans are causing it. Let's take advantage of an opportunity to see what we can do for our town, to help our town out. So it's kind of a level of entry for everybody. And some towns are going to really want to dig into the mitigation aspect, and some folks are really just going to want to dig into, like, hey, we can get a free heat pump for the town office. We can make a cooling center. We don't do, like, whether you believe in climate change or not, do you want to, like, take care of your vulnerable people in your community and make sure they can get to a cooling center, or if they can, somebody can get to them if we have another ice storm and the power goes out. So there's plenty of ways to talk around if someone's focused on a certain aspect of that denial. There's plenty of ways to kind of work around that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Scott. Vanessa put a great comment in the chat, which is that the Maine Climate Table offers 60 to 90-minute workshops for the public on communicating about the climate. Vanessa, do you want to speak for just a moment on what those are?
Sure. So Tyler Kidder is a tremendous asset, but she facilitates these workshops where people kind of figure out the proper language to address climate so that we're not kind of already starting out of the gate with polarizing opposition. So I've found them really helpful. I have attended more than one, and I think I glean something different every time that I attend, and they're free. So if that's something that folks in this group would benefit from, feel free to look them up. I can actually go and put something in the chat if that's helpful.
Awesome. That would be helpful. I wanted to note as well, because Luke, this is a great question and just got me thinking about a lot of things about how we typically try to communicate the benefits of climate and clean energy work. And I think one of the big things in Maine is that 54% of our climate emissions come from transportation and 30% come from heating, lighting, and cooling our buildings. That's over 80% of our emissions, and transportation and heat are just two things that are applicable to every single person who lives in the state. And advancing those industries and making sure that our homes are more airtight and more energy efficient, making sure that our cars are more efficient, especially in the light of rising fuel costs, is just mutually beneficial from an economic perspective, from a jobs perspective, and of course from a climate perspective. But it doesn't have to be from a climate perspective that we're making this progress. So I think that's a really important point to make. And I think on the flip side, in terms of energy generation, Maine does not produce fossil fuels. So we send $4.5 billion out of state each year to purchase fossil fuels for heating our homes and for fueling our cars. And the more energy that we can produce in state with labor that is from in-state sources, the more energy independent we're going to be, the less money we have to send out of state. And I think you can go on to enumerate a lot more economic advantages. But I think speaking to the multi-tiered benefits that come from making some of these changes and solutions has been at least somewhat successful for us.
Josh, I'm glad you made that last point, because that's on our fact sheet that we hand out to everybody that attends these meetings. And when we talk about how much money leaves the state that could be kept in our communities, everybody's nodding like, oh, wow. And that $4.5 billion figure was when gas was $2.60 a gallon. I mean, it's probably closer to, $8 or $9 billion leaving the state now with the cost of heating oil and fossil and gasoline where it is. So we just did the calculation for Norway when we wrote the Norway grant, and it was, I forget now, it was over $20 million. Just leaves our little community here in heating, oil, and gas. And if we can start to, keep that money in our community, how, what that could do for the community, for our local economy. So it really turns some heads.
I want to leave space. We're nearing the end here. We have 5 minutes left. Are there any other questions or comments that are out there? Suzanne?
Thank you. I was just going to type into the chat that in 1998, and people on this call may not know who Charlie Colgan. He was the chief economist for the state back in the late 90s under Governor Baldacci. He did a report because I helped commission it on what it would mean if we kept 10% of it was then $4 billion. It's amazing how that hasn't fluctuated in all this time. But, he did a calculation and a report, which I will find and share with everybody. I don't think it's changed that much. If we kept 10% of that $4 billion and reinvested it in our economy, what it would mean for jobs and state income, GDP. And so I think that might be of use to this group. It's still, I think, again, viable, and maybe we can update it.
Thank you for that comment, Suzanne. We appreciate that. Any other closing thoughts or comments from the group here before we move on with our days? Wonderful. Well, we can end it there, but know that the conversations aren't ended. My contact information, I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat here. I encourage you to reach out with any questions that you have about any of these programs. And be sure to check out our municipal climate toolkit. I think there's a lot of really great stuff there to investigate and to figure out what you might be able to do that's actionable in your own community. So we'll keep this conversation going. Thank you so much for attending today, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays. Stay cool.